Now.
Crazy build going on.
Always going for the Tetris.
He held out. Boom. Tetris for Joseph. Can he do it?
He's one away.
One and change will do it.
Oh.
And a long bar. Is it going to come? Where is it? Or is there going to be a drought? How's this going to play out? Oh,
okay, that's perfect. It's set up now. He's still
just
waiting. 13-piece drought. 17-piece drought. There's the long bar. There it is.
Tetris for Joseph. And we have a new Tetris World Champion. 16-year-old Joseph Saley has done it.
He
oh my
is
goodness.
Your new classic Tetris World Champion, taking it away from 7-time champion Jonas Neubauer. The young kid on the block. He has done it. Unprecedented results here.
The bizarre history of Tetris. Its graphics are simple, and its rules are straightforward. Rotate fast-dropping puzzle pieces on your computer screen to fit together and create solid lines which then disappear. Repeat to infinitum. Tetris, the hugely popular and addictive game that swept the world in the 1980s and 1990s, continues to engage and captivate players today. Unlike the majority of products developed during the early boom years of video game design, Tetris was a no-frills outlier, no fancy images, no memorable characters and no narrative. But while the game may be uncomplicated, the story of how it came to dominate the gaming industry and bewitch millions of people around the world is quite the opposite. The tale is rife with handshake deals, game industry rivalries, and tense negotiations between Western executives and Soviet officials during the last decade of the Cold War, when relations between the USSR and countries in the West were anything but friendly. Here are 10 weird facts about Tetris. 10. Its inspiration. The idea of fitting separate pieces together came to Tetris creator Alexey Pajitnov from his love of pentamino puzzle games. In these home games, separate pieces made up of 5 blocks are supposed to be arranged to fit together. Making this directly as a video game proved to be no fun, so dropping the blocks down added the pressure of time, while the disappearing lines gave a sense of satisfaction and made games last potentially forever. 9. Game development in Russia at the time. In an interview with Adam Sessler, Alexey Pajitnov talks about game development in Russia at the time of Tetris creation in 1984. More accurately, he talks about how it essentially did not exist. No companies were developing video games and no industry was selling them. The most famous game console in Russia, the Dendy, would not be produced until 1992. This background of gaming the Soviet Union would play into the difficulties publishing it later on. 8. Vadim Gerasimov. While Alexey Pajitnov is the creator behind Tetris, he received some help along the way, even before it came time to try and sell the product. When he wanted to port the game to other computers, he enlisted the help of Vadim Gerasimov. Only 16 years old at the time, Gerasimov was already a star programmer, and helped Pajitnov port the game with lightning speed to an IBM computer. He has since moved to the United States and is now working at Google. 7. It was made to test out hardware. If gaming was a non-existent industry in the early 80s, why did Alexey Pajitnov make the game in the first place? Its main purpose was to test out hardware, though this was more of an excuse to play games. He worked at a research center where he and his colleagues had the opportunity to work on their own projects after typical work hours. While his main purpose was researching artificial intelligence, many of his co-workers were also fascinated with games, which led to them using the tech to make leisure titles. 6. The name. The name Tetris comes from 2 separate places. Tetra means 4, which makes sense considering each piece is made of 4 blocks. The other inspiration comes from tennis, which is Alexey Pajitnov's favorite sport. While the latter does not really make that much sense in relation to the actual game, it helped create a new word and forever change the landscape of gaming. In today's gaming world, creating a new word would certainly help with Google search results. 5. Robert Stein. The first person to take any interest in bringing Tetris to the West was Robert Stein. The game eventually made its way to Hungary, which was still a part of the Soviet Union at the time. Robert Stein would often visit Budapest to look for Eastern European software and bring it out from behind the Iron Curtain. Stein eventually saw an employee of the Computer Institute he visited playing the game and wanted to bring it to Western audiences. 4. The computers it was made on were already outdated. In the early 80s, computer technology was still in its infancy. Even with this considered, the computer Tetris was made on was already severely outdated. The game was first programmed for the Elektronika 60, which was an imitation of the West's PDP-11. Unfortunately, this computer was already outdated by the time it was cloned and brought to the Soviet Union. On the bright side, it did not take a lot of processing power to make Tetris run, which is a part of its genius. 3. Publishing issues. Getting Tetris published in the West was a huge issue. Rights became a headache with huge legal ramifications when Robert Stein sold the publishing rights before actually securing the rights. In 1988, the issues were smoothed out, but this did not secure consoles or arcade machines. Hank Rogers eventually secured the rights for consoles for Nintendo, which led to its iconic release alongside the Game Boy, a version that includes multiplayer. 2. Pajitnov's royalties. As Tetris was made during company time in the Soviet Union, Alexey Pajitnov did not receive any financial compensation for creating one of the most legendary games of all time. He almost got in some serious trouble when it was found out he was potentially negotiating business transactions with Robert Stein. Only in 1996 did the creator eventually start receiving royalties. He set up the Tetris company with Hank Rogers, which licenses the game out to third parties. 1. The sequel. While Tetris is the game everybody talks about, sequels actually came to fruition. The first of these was Well Tries, which retains the same concept but adds a three-dimensional angle. The perspective is shown from the top looking down instead of from the side. The game was received well, though some criticisms were lobbied towards certain versions' controls. At the end of the day, it failed to catch on in the same way Tetris did.
Now, the emotions are coming and you can see 16 years old, and without a game like Tetris, a 16-year-old kid from California would never have an experience like this. Look, he is beside himself with emotion right now, and here comes his mom to congratulate him. Sister, mom.
He has slain the dragon. Ladies and gentlemen, your 2018 Classic Tetris World Champion is Joseph Saley!